All right, in the previous video, we started talking about classes and objects. We wrote a contact class that was meant to simulate the type of contact class you might have in an application, contact application on your phone, something that stores the names and numbers of people that you want to call. So we were keeping things very basic. So our contact application, our contact class, only has a name and a number, right? And it only has one method. There's really only one thing you could do, and that is look at the name that is stored in the contact class. All right, and then we wrote another class that used this contact class. So in your this would be your contact main application that you would have on your phone, and then we just created a couple of contacts. And if you watch the previous video, you'll know that those contact objects were blank, right? There was no name or number in there, which is not incredibly useful. So in this video, we are going to talk about how you would actually go about putting a name and a number inside of that contact class. Okay. Before we can do that, though, we will need to talk about access levels for fields and methods in classes. Okay. So each field in a and also a method, right, has an access level. And for fields, it's private, package, protected, and public. Okay. So public we've seen before. We've been making all our classes public, right? So likewise, for fields, you could have public right here, all right, and public right here. Okay, so that's what it would look like if you made this public. If you make something public, that means that any outside class can manipulate the name and number, okay? And so generally we don't do that, all right? The next access level is package, and you'll notice package looks different from private, protected, and public. The reason why it looks different is there's no package keyword. To make it package, you just put nothing. So this would be an example of package level access. So package level access, we haven't talked too much about packages themselves, other than to say that they are a collection of related classes. And so for right now, you can just think of that as classes that are in the same directory as the class that you are in. Okay, so that's when you put nothing in there. All right, and then protected, we will not talk about that in this class. In Java 2, you'll talk about that, probably one of the first things that you talk about in Java 2. All right, and then private. So when you mark something as private, that means that a field is private. That means that it cannot be used by any outside class. All right, so that's going to have some repercussions in there. All right. Each class has one of two possible access levels: package level and public. That's when package level would look like this, right? I've asked you to go ahead and make your classes public. So all right, so now what we want to do is, and I'm going to go back here and just I'm going to set these back to being package level to do this example. Okay, so remember when we ran this test contact class before, we wound up with just null values, right, in our two contact objects, and we really don't want that to happen. Okay, we want there to be some information in here if we're creating a contact. Okay, these null values can cause problems in your program. So that's not great to have them null like that. All right, so now what we're going to do is say, okay, how can we set the name and set the number inside here? All right, and so we're going to do that. In this case, it depends, right? The method by which you do that is going to depend on the access level, okay, of the field in there. So how these things are marked in this contact class, okay? So it depends. So first off, we're going to talk about how to access non-private fields in an object. And to do that, you would use the dot notation. You would put the name of the object and then dot and then the name of the field that you want to look at, okay? So for instance, if you wanted to change contact1's name from being null or essentially no value to Asdrubal Cabrera, then this is how you could do that, okay? So let's go ahead and do that. So going to the text contact class, and now instead of having a blank name in there, I want to change contact1's name to Asdrubal Cabrera. Okay, and so now when I run this, you're going to see after I do line 7 here, boom, it is going to set the name of contact1 to Asdrubal Cabrera. Okay, and so that is how you would change a field that is not private in a class, how you would set it. Right? Again, it's using the dot notation, which is essentially means go look inside, right, of this thing that comes on the left. So here, right, this is a contact object. So it says, hey, go look at that object contact1 that was created up here in line 6. Look inside there. And look inside that object, and you're going to find a field named name. I want you to set that to Asdrubal Cabrera. Okay? So that is how you would create or change a non-private field. Same thing if you have a non-private method in an object and you want to call that method, then you would put the name of the object and then the dot and then the name of the method that you want to call inside there. Our contact objects only have one method right now, getName. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go ahead and print it out, otherwise you won't see it. So if I do contact1.getName, open and close parentheses, right, because it's a method. So this says, hey, oops, sorry, I forgot contact1. This says, hey, go to contact1 object that you created up here in line 6. Look inside that object, and you are going to find a method called getName. I want you to call that method. And so that's going to call this getName method over here. And that's going to return whatever the name is, right? It's going to look at this field and return it and call that method. So now when I run this, you can see that it has the name printed out. All right, so that is completely done by this line right here. Okay. All right. So that is the basics of how you would access a non-private field from an outside class and how you would call a non-private method from an outside class. Okay. So again, that's outside class. That is because when we were doing this example, right, test contact1 was this method, all of these variables and names were inside the contact class, but we were doing it from an outside class, all right, test contact, one that's not contact. All right, so next it says add code to the test contact.java program to set all the fields in the contact1, contact2 objects. Okay, so let's do that. I'm going to go ahead and set the number for contact 1 and contact 2, after it's created, I am going to set its name to something and set contacts to name and number to some values in here. So now when we run this, we will see that the contact 1 object gets created, contact 1's number gets set. All right, next up we're going to print this out, and so you're going to see this method get called right here, contact1.getName. So contact1.getName is going to go look inside the contact1 object or class, and you can see it follows this code right here. Get name, it returns the name, and then goes back to where it was called from, and then that name that it returned is going to get printed out. So it'll print Asdrubal Cabrera down here. Same thing on the second one. Creates a new contact object, so it goes and looks at those values. So after line 12, I get this blank contact 2 object that was set up. Next up, line 13 changes the name, and line 14 changes the number. So now we have 2 fully set up contact objects. Okay? Okay. So now we can put legitimate names and numbers in our contact objects. That's great. It says add code to the testContact.java program to call the getName method in the contact1 and contact2 objects. Okay, so I'm going to do that, and it's essentially just this line right here. And I need to change this to contact2 and line that back up. All right, and then you can see it does the same thing, but it prints out the name of contact2. All right. All right. Okay, so that is the basics of how you would create create objects and then manipulate the fields and call methods inside those objects, okay, when those things are non-private. So this type of program that we're talking about here is called object-oriented programming, and there's also object-oriented design. This type of program has a number of philosophies that it likes to follow. One of those philosophies is what's called data encapsulation. That is to hide the fields and of a class and other implementation details from other classes. Okay, and so in particular in Java, what that data encapsulation kind of boils down to, in Java, you should use the private access for fields unless you have a good reason not to. Okay, so that's just kind of the standard way that things seem to get done in Java. There are other languages where that's not the case so much. So what you want to do is to use private in Java, and so that's what I'm going to ask you to do on the homework that I give you and everything else, right? I'm going to ask you to make these fields appear private because that is essentially the Java way of doing things. Okay, so even on programming assignment 5, even though I don't tell you to make these fields private, and on the final exam, I'm not going to tell you to make these fields private in Java, right? You need to go ahead and make them private for assignments, especially if you're writing code for other people and things like that, because it just kind of seems like that's what's expected. Again, that's not true for all languages. Okay. All right. So mark these fields as private is what that boils down to. What that means is, though, as soon as we mark those things private, there's going to be some issues with our test contact code. All right, when I go to compile this now, it was working perfectly before. You're going to see that there are a bunch of errors here. All right, it says name has private access in contact. So if you're paying attention to when I was talking about this earlier, I said you could do this for private, for non-private fields. The minute you mark it as private, like you're supposed to in Java, you can't use this anymore. Okay, so if you want to allow outside access to private fields, what you've got to do is do that through a public method. The public method is the public methods. There are two types. Some are called get methods, and that get name method that we have already written in our contact program is one. Okay. The purpose of this get method, of these get methods, is to allow an outside class to view a private field. Okay. And then the other type are what are called set methods. The set methods allow outside classes to change private fields inside of a class. Okay. So what we would have to do is, if we wanted to, go through and provide for each one of these fields a get method, and for each one of these fields a set method. Okay. And they all kind of look alike. So I'm going to change this to get and set methods. And essentially we already have the get method for name. All right, so we would write a get method for number. To do that, it would be almost exactly like this one, right? It would be public, and then whatever type the field is, right? Number is of type string, so the return type of the get method for that field would be string, and then get number and then I would return whatever field that I wanted to return here. In this case, is number. All right. All right. So next up are set methods. The set method for name, that would allow an outside class to set this method right here. How it would look is public, and then the return type would be void. Okay. And then the set method for the field name would be called set name. All right. All right, so now with the set method, with the get method, you don't need any method parameters in here, because you're just saying, hey, what's the name? Hey, what's the number, essentially. With set name, there has to be a parameter in here. So you are essentially, this method is going to be used to change the name of the contact, right? Maybe you misspelled something, you need to fix that typo, so you're going to change the name to something else. That's the kind of functionality that this would provide. Okay, so it has to have a parameter. You have to tell it what name that you want to create. Okay, or what name do you want to change it to. All right, and so you need to put a parameter in here of type string, right? The same as whatever the type of the field is, and then you have to put a variable name here. So the minute you put the variable name right here, okay, that's going to cause a little bit of an issue. Okay, the issue is that if you look at the scope of this variable, right, this variable was declared right here. So if you go backwards and find the first open curly brace, right, you can see that the scope of that variable name up here is all of this. Okay, and so using name as the parameter here, you'll have two variables that have an overlapping scope inside here, and then Java has some rules for figuring that out. When Java has that, in this situation, when you have two scopes, right, two variable scopes that are overlapping, Java is going to go with the local variable before it goes with the field. Okay, so there's a couple of ways to deal with that. What we want to have happen is that whatever this parameter is, it gets copied up to this field up here. So we want to change this field, so that's name. So name equals, and the problem is if you name this the same, name equals name, it really won't do anything, because when Java sees this, it will say, oh, this name is this one right here. Okay, so there's a couple of things you can do. Number one, which I don't even really like because of what I'm about to show you after this, you can come up with a different name for the parameter. Call it name1 here, name1 here. I don't like doing that because that is, although it works, okay, but it's an really old-fashioned way of doing things, okay? The better way to do that, especially in Java, it provides something where you don't have to constantly be coming up with new names. All you have to do is put this dot in front of the name that represents the field. So when Java sees this, right, with this dot, it now knows this, when it doesn't have this dot in front of it, it's this version of the variable right here. This dot name will always refer to a field. So one of these variables up here named name. When it's just like this, Java thinks that you are referring here and here to this variable right here, which is not what we want. What we want is for whatever parameter comes in, whatever value comes in here, to be copied to this version of name up here. And so Java provides a really nice mechanism for it to tell these apart. Anytime you put this dot and a variable name, it refers to the field up here. Okay, so this takes whatever comes in to this parameter and then copies it up here to this. Okay, so remember, this dot always refers to, and a variable name always refers to one of the fields up here. All right, and now if we type the set method for number, it'll be set number. It'll be public void on the set methods, and then the type of number is string, so this will be string. Oops. And the set methods at the very least should have this line in here. So take whatever comes into this parameter and copy it to this dot number, which remember always refers to the fields up here when it's a variable name. Okay. All right, so those are the set methods. So when you mark a field as private and you want to allow an outside class to change or view the value of these variables, then you need to add these get and set methods. The purpose of the get methods is to allow the outside class to look at the values of the fields. The purpose of the set methods is to allow an outside class to change the value of the fields. Now, when I first learned this, I was like, well, you know, what's the point of doing that? Because why make it this complicated? Because you know, an outside class can still change this to whatever. How is that any more secure than the previous way when these were not private? And the answer is now you don't even have to provide these. This is just if you want to. Okay, so now the object basically has more control over itself. You could add some code in here so that if the outside class tried to do something that would cause your program to crash, or you know, change something it shouldn't be changing, inside these methods you could say, no, you're not going to do that. We're not going to do that right now because that would make these examples more complicated. But the point of this, of doing it this way, is that it's a lot more secure doing it this way in Java. Okay. Now before, the way we had it, an outside class could change any of these things that they wanted to. Okay, now an outside class, we could prevent that if we felt like it by putting some code in here that would prevent that. So the object basically before had no control over itself, anybody could come along and tell that class, hey, you change your name to whatever, and the class would have no recourse over it when these were not public. It would have to change its name to whatever. Now, right, the class can say, no, I don't want to change my name to whatever, right? I can prevent that from happening. Okay, let's compile that and make sure that everything is good. Okay, so we have a class now. It has two private fields. It has some get and set methods. Remember, in this class, you should always mark these as private, okay? When you're turning in your work for programming assignments or on the final exam. Okay, so now what we're going to do is fix this class. So the test contact class is trying to use contact.java, right? And it can't because it is trying to change things that it can't change, okay? Because of the fact that these are now private, okay? All right, so what we're going to have to do now is change this. So in line 7, this was changing the name to Asdrubal Cabrera using the old way. Now what we would have to do is use the set name method. And it is a method, right? So we would just have parentheses, and then inside parentheses we would put the name that we want to change it to. All right, so now instead of telling the contact one object, hey, change your name to this, we are basically requesting, hey, could you change your name to this? All right, same thing for the numbers. So when it's private, you have to use the set methods, if there are any. All right, and same thing down here. If we want to change the name to whatever, we have to use the set name method now. And use the set number method. All right, and so that should work, and you can see we get the same functionality now. We get our two contact one objects set up. Okay. All right, so that's how to create and use get and set methods. So again, on your work that you turn in, should always mark these as private. Your field should have get and set methods for the time being. When you start designing your own classes, then maybe you have a class where you don't want to add a set or get method, then you don't have to do that. Okay. All right, so let's modify the contact class to make all fields private. We've done that. Add get and set methods for all field. Done that. Modify the contact class by adding get and set methods. Fix the test contact class. We've done that as well. Okay, so that is the basic introduction to classes and objects. We talked about fields and methods are in this new type of class that we made, that these classes represent real world objects. We talked about the get and set methods and how to add those in there. So, all right, let's see if we have any. Nope. So in the next couple of videos, we will work through some examples from the practice problems.